of their sort of approach, some of their solutions, and then we're going to have about half an hour of discussion at the end. So we'll keep all questions to the end, if that's okay. So just to introduce myself, my name is Nick James. I've a background in sustainable housing, so design, delivery and evaluation of that for the last 20 years or so. And the kind of title of this evening's talks is Homes for a Sustainable Future. So I think just to kind of give a little bit of context to that before handing over to our speakers, I think homes and the communities we live in play such a key role in either enabling or kind of frustrating us in terms of living sustainable lifestyles. So that's about, can be what they're made of, or how they're designed, where they're located. They all have significant kind of consequences for our environmental footprint and our kind of social well-being. So I think looking at the homes we build now and how they're going to be resilient, they're going to be fit for purpose for the future, where we need to do much more with less in terms of our resources. That's the key issue for making sure that we get the new homes we're building today correct. So the talks today will be looking at the kind of broader housing challenge through the lens of sustainable lifestyles, effectively. Just to say that we're going to be we are streaming today's talks on Facebook. So we were sold out for tonight, so there's been a lot of people online following us all week, including my mum. So hello, Mum. I only found that out last night. So I think that's kind of it, really. I think I'll hand over, first of all, to Chris Dunford from With the Curious. He's head of Sustainable Futures here, and he's going to be talking about do, talk, share, and winning, and occasionally losing. That's sustainability in a landmark Bristol building. So, Chris, over to you.
Thank you. So I'm the head of Sustainable Futures here at With the Curious, which means I get the pleasure of welcoming you to our building, and also telling you that I know very little about housing. My presentation hopefully is going to cover two things instead. I'm hopefully going to give you an overview of sustainability as we see it, and then talk a little bit about this building and how we've tried to make this hopefully the most sustainable science centre in the UK at the moment. I think this is a useful place to talk about sustainability, mainly because we're very keen to be engaging the visitors with that, and we have over 300,000 people come through our doors each year, which means we've had to get quite good at talking about sustainability to a whole range of people who will have different understandings and issues and concerns with that word and what does it mean. So hopefully we're in a good place to give an introduction, at least at the start of this evening, of what we think that means. And I think for us, it means this. And this is Earthrise. This was taken by the astronauts on Apollo 8, and it's very much recognised as the image which kind of kicked off the modern sustainability movement. And for us, it embodies sustainability because it basically sums up your problem right there. The problem is that the Earth that you can see is where we all currently are, and at least for now, it's the only place we can all go. Around the Earth is space, and you cannot live in space. So we are stuck on the one planet, and for now that's all we have, and so all the resources and all the consequences of our actions are on that one planet, and therein lies the issue. So as a science centre, we like to understand it from this point of view, which means you can then open up the discussion into this lovely equation here, which is that obviously we know population is increasing, and not only are there more people on the planet each day, but those people are going to, at least if we follow current trends, going to have more demanding lifestyles, demanding of the planet. And so you have more people putting more demands on the planet, so that side of the equation is constantly going up. On the right-hand side of the equation, it is fixed. You have a finite planet, and so therein the problem lies. And that's really the underlying philosophy that we try and start from when we're talking to public. What do we mean by sustainability? We're trying to sustain for future generations and for the planet, whilst dealing with that, at the moment, quite unbalanced equation. That doesn't mean that we used to use this old model, which is the model where you say, well, that means sustainability must be made up of the environmental, the social, and the economic, and they all kind of cross over in the middle. But we didn't like this because it kind of implies they're all separate, they just come together and there's no link between them. So we think about it like this instead. The environment is surrounding you, it encapsulates you, which means that everything you get to live in some way is ultimately derived from the environment, and the consequences of the way you live is going to impact the environment. and the planet will quite happily carry on with or without us. But while we're here, we form society, and within society, we use economy as our way of ordering ourselves, at least at the moment. And when you see it this way, you recognise that all the decisions you made, economic and social, are going to impact the environment. It's not separate, it is not over there, it is not somewhere else, it is surrounding you all the time. And that means we then talk about these kind of issues. Now, these are the images you would probably expect to see if you're talking about sustainability. These images immediately should conjure up issues around things like sea level rise and climate change, loss of habitat, loss of biodiversity, issues around food and water, and the type of ways in which we pollute our environment, whether that be polluting the air or plastic. We're going to take questions at the end, if that's okay. Oh, you'd like me to stand here? Yes, that's fine. All the way here. That's fine. That's okay. I can go outside. You might hear me from outside. Plastic is one example I've used, but obviously there are other examples of pollution. Can everyone see okay now? Great, thanks. Back a bit more. A bit more? How about I swing this around? Oh! Sorry. There we go. Yeah? Okay. Well, on the plus side, it's my own carpet I've ruined, so I'll be cleaning that tomorrow. So these are the things that we are used to talking about, the types of pollution, climate change, biodiversity loss. The issue we sometimes find when talking to people about this is it does limit us very much in the area of the science and the understanding of the natural world. These images we are familiar with sustainability, and what we're trying to get people to think about is perhaps these are the images we want them to think about instead. Because we are not detached from the natural world, we are entirely linked to it. And so if you start to impact the natural world, the environment around us in those ways, then it is going to affect the food that we eat and drink. It's going to be affecting the air, already is affecting the air that we breathe, and that will have knock-on effects as well in terms of society and economy. And I think that's one of the bigger challenges for us as a science centre sometimes, because people expect us to talk about things like this. I don't know how you feel when I look at this, but in a very scientific way I can react to this. I don't have too much of an emotional reaction to this. And I think for a long time, especially when I was in school, this is the way we thought about things like global warming and climate change in this very scientific way. I don't know if we're so used to the fact that actually climate change could potentially look like this. Now, this is a far more emotive image. We react in a very emotional way to this image. But what it tells us is that when sustainability problems start to affect society, and bear in mind we're talking about things like this, it's not difficult to see how that might actually affect the society in which we live. And so I suppose the challenge for us is, yes, we need the science underlying it, but we need to then think, how does that science, what are we learning about the environment around us? But what does that mean about our daily lives? And so for us, the polar bear is not the useful mascot that you might think, because the polar bear is far away in time, it's far away geographically, but actually the people, the species that will be affected by climate change actually is people, and especially people living in our very complex cities. Hopefully you're not too depressed at this point. So instead, let me remind you of something that with every crisis there is an opportunity, and that's the philosophy that we have adopted here. We want to give people a hope-led, not fear-driven approach, by which I mean in the same way in which cities can be affected by the negative impacts of climate change, it's also very much in cities and populated areas where if we find the right solutions to sustainability, we can hopefully create cities which are greener and healthier and happier and fairer, as well as more productive. So it's less about, an element is about what do we stop doing, what do we give up, but it's more about how do we work in a way which is fairer and smarter, so that the cities of the future not only are more sustainable, but are better places to live for a whole range of other reasons as well. So it becomes very much about kind of social justice as much as it does about the environment. And that's a very difficult story for us sometimes to tell, but it's one I'm going to try and explain some of the things that we've done here and how we're trying to tell some of those stories and again bring people to this idea of a positive future. There is also a purely practical thing in this as well, which is that if you tell people all the facts in this slightly dire way and expect them to go away and change their behaviour overnight, it doesn't often work like that. Humans are quite complicated. There's a lot of psychology going on in the way that people react to these issues. And so what can tend to be more effective is getting people to talk about what future they'd like to see, what world they would like to live in, and that applies to housing and cities and everything, and then trying to see how we imagine those more sustainable futures and how we move towards those, rather than always focusing on some kind of apocalypse, without losing the fact that there are some serious issues that are already starting to be seen now. What does that mean for a science centre, a nice happy place in the middle of the city where you hopefully come to enjoy a day or an evening out? How do we react to that huge issue, the biggest threat facing our species? Well, like any organisation, there's a lot that we can do. We have a new manifesto. You might have seen this in the foyer on the way in. Within our manifesto, we have a range of aims. As a science centre, we want to cultivate curiosity and open up science in our city, but very much when it comes to the kind of social and environmental side of sustainability, we're trying to do a lot more around diversity, and again, this idea of being a place where you can imagine and debate and experience and play around with different sustainable futures. We're a place in the city where you can come and do that. In a very literal sense, perhaps with technology, or where we can facilitate discussion. So this idea that, yes, we envisage sustainable futures. We've made it plural, because we're not assuming there's one sustainable future for everyone. What do those sustainable futures look like, and what can we do? And within that, we break that down into some sections, which are quite wordy, so I will skip straight to this. We've broken down our approach to sustainability into 3 sections. The do, the talk, and the share. I'll explain about what each of these mean. And the do for me is actually the most important. The do is a foundation upon which everything else is then built. Because do means the way that we operate sustainably. So you might expect that what I wanted to tell you about is all the wonderful things that we tell the public and the way we engage school children. I think actually the most important thing we do is actually look very closely at the way that we operate. So this building, as you imagine, has an environmental impact. Our operation every day will have a negative impact on the environment in many ways. We're always trying to measure that, we're trying to mitigate that, and we're trying to have positive impacts on the environment wherever possible. That is the foundation. And from that foundation, then we are better equipped to talk to people around these issues and help them to create more sustainable futures, and also to share that with all the various partners around the city and around the world we're now working with. Let me give you some examples of what we do when I say we do sustainability on site. Energy is a key one for us. It's a very energy-hungry building, as a science centre you'd imagine probably is. Usually in this talk I have one slide on this, but because it's a housing festival, I'm assuming at least some of you have an interest in buildings and architecture and systems. I'm just going to indulge myself slightly just to talk about what we actually have here that you're sitting in. You are sitting currently here, and you are in a 1903 French Hennebeek style railway shed. It's one of the first examples of steel reinforced concrete in the world, and in the late 90s it looked like this on a wasteland site. Not particularly attractive. It was actually being used as an old car park. And the project was to take this building and to turn it, as an example of inner city regeneration as well, was to take the building, turn it into a modern science centre, and in doing so take 11 acres of wasteland site and turn that into what was envisaged as the new heart of the city. So our railway shed, which was derelict and grade 2, listed into this new building here. And within it they put this. Now ideally for this I would take you on a tour around the building, but there's not enough time and there's too many of you to fit in the plant room. So I'll explain briefly what we have in this building that makes it so special. Back in the late 90s they gave a set of architects and engineers, because it was a Millennium project, a certain amount of money and the ambition of design the most low energy building that you can. And so they introduced what at the time was some new technologies. They put air source heat pumps, so all the heating and cooling for this building comes from air source heat pumps, but they decided they didn't want to run the air source heat pumps during the daytime because they would still be putting a load onto the national grid at peak time. They decided they only want to heat and cool this building at night using night electricity, which creates a problem, of course, because you need a way of storing it. So downstairs we have what was at the time the first phase change storage tank in the UK. So this building is able to essentially store hot in the winter, store cold in the summer using night electricity, and then distribute it through a network of water source heat pumps through every room in the building. So the building is able to essentially move hot and cold around. A single system does heating and cooling and can redistribute around the building, which means if a room is too hot, while somewhere down the corridors a room is too cold, we simply relocate the heat to where it is wanted. They put in various other clever things as well. In this building, all the ventilation is CO2 controlled, heat recovery wheels. Even in the car park, so we have a car park underneath Millennium Square. Those who know Bristol might recognise these towers along Millennium Square, and if you ever wonder what they are, they're the ventilation for the car park beneath. The ventilation itself is controlled by carbon monoxide levels and various variable speed drives. They included green roofs on the building, waterless urinals, and a whole range of technologies, which in the late 90s was quite unusual. Our planetarium was lit by a technology called LED, which at the time was very exciting. And various control systems that since then we have tweaked. So we were given the building and all the hardware was fine. We've spent 20 years teaching the software to be a bit smarter. We've also created the first LED lit car park in the city, and had what at the time was the largest photovoltaic array in Bristol as well. So we tried to take the original ethos of the building and update it, but I suppose the most useful thing to mention is we've done a 27% energy reduction purely through reduction measures. So all that technology has helped, but actually the behavioural stuff has had a huge impact on this building. In terms of water, there's some interesting things that we do. So we have green roofs, which are above you right now, in fact. We have green roofs on this building, again, looking at a city and saying when it's raining, what's happening, all the water is going straight into sewers and drains and causing potentially problems. Here it grows the plants, which in turn support the beehives, which are up on the roof. So we have a small ecosystem running on the roof based upon rainwater, but we're not adding to that kind of surge of rainwater in this immediate location. It's all staying on the roof instead. As I said, there were waterless urinals installed at the time. We have a type of rainwater harvesting that we use in our outside spaces, and various measures we've added since then. Waste is an interesting one. We've done all the kind of recycling and things you might expect. Again, everyone very much obsesses around recycling, and as a sustainability person, my job is to try and get them to think about reducing the stuff in the first place before it becomes waste. We've been experimenting with a composter on the roof for the last few years, and we are struggling with it. That's one of the things. We're not always winning. This is the point. When you're going to try and put a composter on the middle of a city centre building, when everyone tells you can't do that, and you say, yes, we are, it's going to be difficult. But as I said, it's about experimenting with new ways of doing things here. So we have a food waste composter up on the green roof as well, and we use the compost on the allotments outside. Procurement's an interesting one. We didn't do a huge amount on procurement to start with, and then we recognised that arguably the money we were spending was the biggest impact we were having overall. And so we've done various things in the last few years around procurement, including running a public campaign now on sustainable palm oil after working to audit our own. Travel, we had some of the first electric vehicle charging points in the city back before 2013, and we're increasing the number of those, and we ran an electric vehicle ourselves, as well as having various cycling facilities on site. And finally, nature's a challenging one. If we were the National Trust and had acres and acres of green land, it'd be quite easy to do something with nature, but in a city centre location, are we limited? Well, no, not really. As I said, we have the green roofs, we have our own beehives, so we produce We the Curious honey, we have the allotments outside in Millennium Square where we're growing food out there as well. So we're trying to do what we can on this site. Let me finish by just saying how we use that as a foundation to then talk. So yes, we reduce our own environmental impact, but those 300,000 people who visit us each year, those 5 million people who cross Millennium Square and Anchor Square each year, how do we reach them around sustainability, and how do we link that to what we're doing ourselves? And that is important because I must admit, for someone who works within the education sector rather than the housing sector specifically, I have noticed that a lot of sustainability is often very clever, very committed people telling you how they are going to tell someone else to be sustainable. I do see a lot of that. You do get a lot of people saying, well, let's tell the next generation to be sustainable, or let's tell business to be sustainable, or let's tell government to be sustainable. What I hear less often is let's work out how to be sustainable ourselves and then share that conversation with other people. I think some predictions are saying that we have about 10 minutes really to kind of solve climate change. Solve is a strange word for that. But if you have 10 years to solve a problem, your best tactic is probably not to engage early primary school children, because they're not the one with the consumer behaviour that's happening around us. You need to reach out to adults as well. And we think the best way to do that is to model the behaviour ourselves. We're lucky here, we've got some nice toys to play with to do that though. So we have a 3D Planetarium, the most advanced projection space in the UK, in which we can visualise various journeys through space to visit various planets. And why don't they have life? Because only Earth has everything you need for life. And then we study everything from the Industrial Revolution onwards and can model various things like deforestation, sea level rise, and how things like renewables can influence the national grid. So we can use toys like that. A planetarium, a place you usually go to learn about space, to actually learn as much about Earth science as about space. We have various schools workshops which take place in the rooms that you're in right now, where we do things like model the national grid, but taking into account various sustainability issues. We had this, I don't think anyone was following this, we had beehives on the roof at part of an experiment at University of Bristol. You could follow our bees on Twitter to see how bees living in a city are affected by things like air pollution and technology. We, as I said, are running a campaign on Parnell in partnership with Bristol Zoo, the first science centre in the UK to actually run a conservation campaign. So that was an interesting step for us. And we've run various tours and talks and things. You can follow some aliens around the science centre as they let you visit the endangered species humanity. So whether you're using humour or dressing up, we are able to approach the sustainability issue from various different angles, and including art as well. So we had a robot in our foyer which was drawing patterns based upon the energy produced by the solar array. So those of you who saw the rather boring LED display on the way upstairs, telling you what the solar panels are doing, not right now, this was doing the same thing, but creating it in the form of an artwork. We are always trying to find new angles to explore this issue, which for some people is quite difficult to engage with and can be quite emotive as well. I think the most interesting place we've done that perhaps is outside in our open spaces where we've had various artworks. They mostly came during 2015, so Bristol's year as the European Green Capital. We had the Bristol Whales, for those who remember those, which was raising issues around sea plastics. So literally, sculptures of whales swimming in a sea of plastic bottles. We had the Wildflower Truck and Wildflower Meadow photographic exhibitions. The nice thing is some of these artworks remain, so we made them permanent. They're originally going into 2015, we wanted to keep them. So there's an energy tree, the bee, as part of the pollen project, and what was at the time the first public drinking fountain in the UK. So that was something we wanted to celebrate, hence the artwork around it. I did mention ways in which we failed on sustainability. Less failing, more challenges. I always, whenever I talk about the energy tree, when we did, people now in Bristol say, oh, we love the energy tree, it's a great thing, why wouldn't you like it? What was interesting for us is when we actually introduced the idea of the energy tree, there was actually some quite negative response to it. And I think if this slide teaches us anything, is that we had to take certain risks with sustainability. If you're going to do new ways of doing things, a lot of the media coverage at the time focused on the fact that to put the tree in, we had to remove a 15-year-old dead cherry tree. And a lot of the media attention was the fact that we were removing a dead tree to put a synthetic tree in. Now the energy tree, which was made by service users on Bristol Drugs Project, provides free phone charging for the city from the sun. And then finally, we've added to these. So those of you entering the building from across Anchor Square would have seen this. This is new, that was only completed last week. That's a mural by artist Anna Higgy looking at climate change and pollinator hotels in the spaces outside. Finally, there's not much I wanted to say on Share other than just to conclude that we're not doing this alone. What we found very early on is we could only make so much impact on our own. We are trying to work in partnership at all levels, and that's because we realised the only way to address a global issue like sustainability is to have some global partners to do that. So we're very active in the city with Bristol Green Capital Partnership and have been for years. The partnership, which now has 800 members around Bristol who all want this shared vision of a sustainable city with a high quality life for all, formed upstairs on the roof terrace of Wheatley Curious in 2007 and celebrated its 10th birthday with significantly more people in 2017. We've done various work with the partnership, and we're keen to always do more of them in the future. We also work nationally with the UK Association for Science and Discovery Centres, our personal sector. We're trying to influence them to make every science centre in the country more sustainable. We work on European projects looking at air quality, and we're part of a global fellowship of science centres as well, sharing experiences globally of dealing with this global problem. This is wordy. What it basically means is we are trying to recognise there's an issue of climate change, and with sustainability in general, we're trying to respond to that. But we think science centres are a great place to do that. They're a place in a community where you can come and you can have these discussions and you can imagine what these more sustainable futures look like. And to have those conversations, we can use our amazing building for that. And what we're trying to move people towards is this idea that actually if we get the solution sustainability right, and we do need to do it soon, then we can create a world which is also healthier and fairer as we do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So now I'm going to hand over to Bill Dunster, so architect, founder, director at Z Factory. Those of you who've been down and looked at the exhibition on the waterfront will have no doubt seen the fantastic Z pod as soon as you go in through the front gate. So I'll hand over to Bill, who's no doubt going to explain.
Okay, I'll go find the slides.
Aha.
No, they're on there.
No, they're next. So if you...
Yeah.
Sorry.
Please. Sorry. Can you just press play? This one? Yeah, that one. Nick, you need to press play on the slideshow.
Yeah. Too much light in here. Save energy, turn some of the lights off. Well, thank you very much. That was a brilliant talk, and I'll try hard to keep up the pace. That was covered an awful lot of ground very quick. I'm going to talk about housing and low energy, working towards zero carbon, zero waste lifestyles, and trying to build communities that really can attempt to move in the direction that we've just heard. So this is one we did a long time ago. This was actually first designed in 1991, and it was our entry to Prince Charles's competition for the new Garden City of Tomorrow. Didn't go down very well with Prince Charles, but eventually Dick and Robinson of the Peabody Trust, and working with Bioregional Development Group, we actually built this project in South London. And this is a sort of zero carbon, zero waste sort of manifesto at that time, called BedZ. And that, I won't go into its successes and failures, but to cut a long story short, about 3 years ago, we built this house at the BRE Innovation Park in Watford. BRE is where they write the building regulations. And it's one of the first homes in the UK that has no net annual energy bills. So we gave up trying to sort of persuade people that climate change was a big problem, and we thought, well, why don't we just offer them no net annual energy bills? So all the renewable energy systems integrated into the building basically power enough, power your home, and also potentially get you to work and back in the morning. And it can do that because the cost of renewable energy has dropped dramatically. The area under the green is the power generated by a building integrated photovoltaic roof, and the area under the grey is the load, or the energy used, electricity used in an all-electric home for running the household. And that gives you this amazing figure where you've got the roof generating about 8 megawatt hours a year, and the house only consuming just over 4 megawatt hours a year. So it's now possible to create energy positive homes really quite easily. Obviously you have to maximise the energy efficiency, you have to do super installation, heat recovery, ventilation, triple glazing, good standards of air tightness and so on. But that isn't that hard anymore. So if you follow this to its logical conclusion, why do you need to build power stations? You've got enough energy left over, about 4 megawatt hours a year on a typical family home, to run your car, so you can have vehicle to grid, where you actually store energy from the solar city, and you put it back into the grid at peak times at night, which means you don't have to build all these nuclear power stations which are popping up around in your neck of the woods. So these ideas came to thought, well, actually, why isn't this being rolled out? It's not happening. People aren't asking for it, probably because they don't know it's possible, and the volume house builders certainly aren't offering it to the general public. So we said, well, look, let's try and make this into a product. And the biggest commodity, or the biggest problem, is that we couldn't get any land, because land is always sold on the open market to the highest bidder, and the highest bidder is always the person who offers the lowest environmental performance specification. Because of logic, we thought, well, where can you get land? It's all over the place. We're using our cities really badly. It's over the roads and over the car parks. And we built this prototype using all the principles from the Zero Energy Bills home, and we basically put little tiny houses over car parks. You can still use your cars. We hope that one day you'll move across and buy electric cars, and you'll charge your electric cars from the roofs of these homes, or from wind turbines off-site, or part of a renewable energy electric distribution for the UK. And we designed the homes using a new system where we built a raft. We put ballast in the bottom of the raft. We park on top of locally sourced aggregate, and the building puts no more pressure on the surface of the tarmac than the cars parked on it. So you don't need to buy foundations. So we've made a big saving now. We haven't got to buy land. We haven't got to pay for foundations, and foundations on a typical building like this, an affordable home, would be pretty near somewhere between £6,000 and £10,000. So we can now spend that money on renewable energy systems integrated into the roof. So if you make solar panels, if you redesign them carefully, so that the aluminium extrusions that make the edge of the solar panels don't all fitted together and interlock, and they keep the water out, then you don't need to buy a roof. So you start to sort of wing slowly, step by step. So instead of buying solar panels that you just stick on the outside of buildings like badges on a Boy Scout shirt, you can now make the buildings and the cladding from renewable energy generating surface. So these are glass solar panels, and they're forming the roof of this industrial building. Or they could form the roof of your communal, your community built above parking, and here it's used to create a sort of all-weather shelter in the space between two of these two terraces, these tiny houses. And then we thought, how do you configure these houses to really solve housing problem? All the land around supermarkets, retail parks, council car parks, all can be repurposed. Hospital car parks can be repurposed to housing key workers and young people, perhaps providing their first home away from home. And that gives you, these ingredients. So we put the solar farm over the car park, we put the tiny houses under the solar farm, and put the electric vehicle charging positions underneath the homes. And so that people don't spend all their time looking out over cars, because I don't like cars any more than you do probably, we thought we'd create a horizontal garden or urban orchard above the parking bays. And then we'd create cheaper houses, which are like little boxes made out of cross-laminated timber. And we use cross-laminated timber because it's a very good carbon sink, but it's also very rigid. So the walls of the building are totally structural, and they act as beams. And we also don't have to finish the interior, we just fireproof it and stain it. So you can have these very, very low-cost buildings.
You need to speak into your mic.
Okay. Have these very low-cost buildings. Sorry, I've only got one arm that works, that's my problem. Very low-cost buildings which can be stacked. They're way better than shipping containers. They don't use any Grenfell insulation materials, they don't use any urethane foams, they're not toxic, they're made out of natural products, breathing walls, and they're very, very strong. So they can be prefabricated in a factory, and we're building these in a converted Marks and Spencer's distribution warehouse. We set up a factory in a matter of months on very low budget, and now we're producing these stackable modules, which are part of an urban system. So they can go on the ground, or they can go in the air. And what we found now is that we can build these homes pretty competitive rates to a conventional construction. They're built out of much higher quality components. You don't get no plastic windows in this, no toxic insulation materials. It's fully mortgageable. These buildings will last, a structural guarantee of 60 years, they'll last over 100 years. So although they're totally relocatable, and you can put them up in a matter of a day, you can take them, put them up and down a number of times. So the prototype that's been erected at Bristol Housing Festival has actually been put out 4 or 5 times already in different places. It's just come from the car park of a sixth form college on the outskirts of Dunster. So with a variety of different house types, you can set up you perch them on a steel rail system. If you keep the cross sections the same, you can then tune your community to meet your housing needs. So you can have 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms. You can put them on the ground, put them on the air. You can put them above park and rides. You can put them above office parks. You can put them on bomb sites. You can put them next to railway stations. You can put them above garage plots. This is in Bath Easton, on the outskirts of Bath. They do pass the building regulations. They are fully warrantable. They have the normal guarantees that normal houses have, providing they're allowed to stay in one place long enough, you can get a mortgage on them. So what we wanted to show was that if we wanted to, we could build these very high performance buildings that would last a really long time, that could be moved if you want to redevelop your land, that don't fight the existing status quo, which is that parking is one of the most important activities in a modern city, which again I dispute. But this is the political reality of today. So no compromises have been made in durability. No compromises really have been made in performance. They can be connected up to the street lighting circuit if you put in the battery storage systems. You can dig the surfaces trench with a smallest bucket on a bulldozer in a day or two. And we really can get going with this new infrastructure. So I'm really proposing that we work with the community. We brought it to the Bristol Housing Festival in an effort to really ask people to lobby the council to say we can solve our own housing problems if we write to the local authority and say, look, can we put some of these homes above our car parks? We're organising a social fund to lend the money so that these homes can be purchased either by the car park owner, which could be the council, or it could be the local community, it could be a housing association. That's really how we think we could solve the housing problem, or start solving the housing problem fairly immediately. And I think what I want to do is really show how this urban system can really start to take off, because you no longer have to think about development as a very rigid, very permanent process. It can change, it can be dynamic, it can respond to urban regeneration. This is one we're doing in Shanghai, this is one we're doing in Dunster. We've got a kit of parts now that builds up to form these communities and meet different density requirements. And then slowly, if this translates through into a development appraisal, you can show the community can actually decide whether it can afford how many homes, to what specification, to what height, how do we meet the disabled access requirements, how do we meet all the normal life and death decisions really about how to create a beautiful environment out of an ugly tarmac desert. And we're working with local authorities to take car parks like this, and then slowly it turns into something like this. We're trying to now move away from the idea that modular buildings are ugly and boring, and they don't fit together well, and they don't create coherent urban systems. We believe the placemaking agenda can be met very successfully. We believe that this is better specification than most in situ constructed homes, and we believe it's very fast. For example, the home that we're showing at the Bristol Housing Expo was actually built in exactly 2 weeks. Obviously, that assumes you've got the materials in your shed ready to start. This particular site is in Havant, on the outskirts, just close to Portsmouth. And what we're doing here is we're bringing all the pedestrians in the car park down to the ground level in one new pedestrianised plaza, which is sort of the conversion of 6 or 7 parking spaces into this little public square, and that has a lift and a staircase and a bin store and recycling centre, and most important of all, a bus stop and a carpool. So we're sort of saying, really, look, there's not much excuse. We can really make a big difference. We can create these pop-up villages virtually overnight. We can have a range of standard products. We can meet the prefabricated agenda. We can build all these homes to very much higher standards than anybody is currently offering on the commercial market. We can integrate community facilities and shared resources, and above all, certainly in Bristol, we could probably meet about 3,000 homes above existing public parking spaces. In London, that's somewhere between 35,000 and 70,000 new homes, and over the UK, it's about 250,000 new homes without having to find any land that was previously allocated to housing. So help us and ask these questions, and these sort of projects can make all these things possible. Thank you.
lot of information there. Fascinating stuff. I think brace yourself for a number of questions. I think that are going to come at the end of the talk. So that should be good. So store them up, and we'll come to them later. I'd now like to introduce Yuli Cadney-Toh, who's architect and director at BDP's Bristol studio.
Yes.
Who's going to be talking about Gap House, sustainable living in forgotten spaces.
Thank you.
So
Thanks, Nick.
Down arrow.
Down arrow.
I think down arrow is forwards.
Hello. Gap House. Okay. Gap House is a way of just using a concept to be able to reach out and engage with the citizens of Bristol, really. Gap House, land is precious. First, I would like to start with a Bristol gem. This is High Kingsdown in Bristol. It was built in the early 70s, that is over 50 years ago, for the Corporation of Bristol. The first group of 59 houses won a Department of Environment Housing Award, commended for being a tightly knit piece of city and a lively townscape. The houses also won the Reba Commendation for the Southwest in 75 when the assessors reflected that, bear with me. The patio houses have been carefully integrated with the surrounding buildings, and the informal arrangement of the houses and access alleyways is very successful. The silhouettes produced by the basic L-shaped grouping of houses result in a pleasing and distinctive character. The linking between the houses is well conceived, and great attention has been given to the detailing of the patio walls and access alleyways. It is the heritage of caring about what we build that we wish to revive here in Bristol. Okay. As I said, land in our cities is precious, and Bristol is no exception. The Gap House is conceived to use backland garage sites. These are typical council-owned and therefore a civic asset. It belongs to us. Many are redundant, leaving awkward, constrained sites considered of little residual value. An example, and the typical nature of those sites. That's actually quite a well-maintained version, but many are redundant and a security problem as well for the local authority. Okay, so simplistically, demolish the garages. You free up the garage plot itself, each of those being one garage. We assign them to 3 to 1 house. A house appears, and the house is actually can be moderated. This is the Gap House, moderated to deal with overlooking, orientation, daylight. So, land is precious, and therefore it's important what we place upon it. I would like you to think 2 generations ahead, from 2035 and beyond. The Gap House is a means for us to imagine collectively, to pool our skills and expertise, of course, to meet the challenges of this not too distant future, certainly within our grandchildren's lifetime. The Gap House, even though small, needs to make a positive contribution to measures to combat climate change, as Chris has talked about, and be part of a city-wide solution and perhaps a planet-wide solution. We need a home that will help us reduce our energy consumption and emissions. We need a home that will take on sustainability from a social perspective, promoting well-being, mental health, social inclusiveness, and of course, as Chris also touched on, food security. The Gap House, though small, has to do its bit. The Gap House is a small starter home. In place of 3 small garages is a house and patio. It could be for 1 to 2 adults, and with the option of a pod extension, say for a child. It is permanent and not temporary, typically in a grouping of 6 or more units. They form a small neighborly cluster, sharing a green and potentially productive garden. Bicycles and on-demand driverless electric vehicles are normal. Larger clusters, of course, can provide the chance for social sustainability. There is a greater mix of people, as it can include varieties such as single-story units, family-sized houses, and co-living units, and include a laundry facility and other party rooms, for example. Okay. So, this is the cutaway of the house. It's still recognizably a house. Again, like Bill's, we proposed a lot of it is off-site manufactured, and therefore, for example here, a CLT version, giving you the option to have a fast and off-site, well, brought to site in a fast assembly. As Bill described, the construction options today are moving away from traditional Bill. It is not a brick, block, mortar, and render and roof tiles. It is lightweight, it sits on short piles. CLT was structurally and as the finish, and as Bill has touched on, timber is a carbon sink. Okay, so CLT becomes viable when there's repetition. Repeatable units make it possible, and it's because it's a complete unit. It avoids thermal bridging and other issues that traditional Bill struggles with. The timber floors are both your floor that you walk on, and also is the finish, and it's insulated from below on the lower slab. Again, super insulated, forms a simple to achieve airtightness form, and it will give choice and personalization as well, because the inside is finished, but the outside allows you to clad it in many different ways. Okay, minimum energy demand, almost no heating needed. Imagine, no gas, no boiler. Emerging technology will be commonplace soon, like a power pack will store electricity generated by the integrated PVs in the roof, as Reader Curious has. But for home, electric main supply off-peak electricity to the power pack when needed. There'll be air source heat pump as an option, and a natural vent heat recovery system from taking the heat from the kitchen and shower that you generated and putting it into the bedroom. Radiant panels embedded into the walls, or perhaps an all-air heated system. Hot water for showers in the wet room. Main power usage is by the washing machine if you have one, and the TV. There shouldn't be any dishwashers. Orientation is key. South-facing windows for winter low sun designed can be rotated to take advantage of passive principles. In a small house, overheating is not an issue, because with the height of the gap house and large opening windows and opening roof line, that would be avoided. So this is just showing an option of personalization on finishes. So you don't have to have a preconception of how your house would look. Okay, a cutaway. This is the interior. The upper level, bedroom, great light, good light, looking onto your own space. This is the lower level, again with the patio and living spaces, the bathroom behind. A simple plan, very simple volume, and the option to add a pod into your patio should you require extra space. Okay, this is actually a video. I'm not really sure how I'm going to activate it. There we go. So I think small spaces need not be uncomfortable, need not feel small. It depends how you put where you put your space and how you use it. So, where we came from as an architectural practice is that we had actually developed a micro-living pod, but used in an apartment block. This is Cadney-Toh in Manchester. So we've applied all the principles achieved there. From a multi-story application to a suburban application. Okay, this is the greening of the gap house. The greening to mitigate urban heat sink, to manage all water falling onto the site and all wastewater through sustainable urban drainage, SUDS, which will be specific to site conditions. It will have ways to harvest and hold water, such as green roofs, all opportunities for planting, including climbers, create habitat for birds, bees, and promote outdoor exercise and provide opportunity for productive kitchen gardening. Ponds and water allow for further heat recovery and flood attenuation. So these are slides of projects that gives you urban inspiration. This is our project in Netherlands, which has a very shallow pond over car parking, and gave us a lot of heat recovery opportunities. This is a project in Woking, which is a total new regeneration of community. Of course, when you get to that scale, there are a lot of opportunities for where you can make the most of sustainability measures. Nonetheless, our gap house can do the same. It does its bit. Now, you say, are there such sites? Yes, there are. There are many and varied. These are actual sites we're actually investigating in another city. So, just to conclude, Gap House is conceptual and virtual at present, but the next step is the realization of the first cluster that will not only serve first residents as a whole, but also act as a living laboratory for the refinement of off-site construction, emerging low energy technology, healthy environments, and most importantly, collectively, reimagining of how we would like our families, communities to live sustainably on our precious land. Thank you.
Thank you. So I mentioned earlier this was the 5th of 5 talks we've had over the week, and obviously accompanying the exhibition down on the waterfront. So this has been an amazing launch. So I've said this to everyone. This is week 2 of a 5-year festival. So we've got a long way to go. But it's a fantastic start, and a key part of getting that such a good start is the supporters that have contributed to kind of getting this to go. So there's a board there, you can see them there. There's been a whole range of organisations who've helped make this launch happen, and are going to be kind of continuing to support as the festival develops over the next 5 years. I just wanted to hand over to Simon Crichton, who's got your team relationship manager, team leader, yes, for Triodos. So one of the key supporters, who just wants to kind of have a couple of minutes just to kind of reflect on the talks today, and also I think get the questions off if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening. So, well, I guess I'd like to thank Jez really for kicking this festival off in Bristol, which is the home of Triodos Bank in the United Kingdom. And I guess our connection as Triodos Bank, we really lend to projects that benefit both people and planet. This fits perfectly. And I guess to give you the best example is to talk about the projects, maybe a couple of projects that we've already supported. So we've got a small corporate finance team in the UK Bank, and they supported actually a project in Bristol. It was Bristol Together. It's now the Together group, and they've gone off on their own without the bank, and they don't need it, and that's part of it. They're going without our support. They don't need it anymore. It's great. But they basically started out by thinking about sustainability and sustainable societies, taking young offenders out of prison alongside experienced contractors and bringing housing that maybe had fallen out of use as a home, basically putting it back into use, but rebuilding a home, but also helping some youngsters back into a field of work that they can then go on and work and then hopefully afford their own house in the future somewhere else. And so that's a sort of example of a great project, how it can work for producing a home, but also a living for somebody as well, so they can afford a home. Another one, which I really like, is a personal favourite, because I started with the bank in 2009. It was a project, I didn't do it, it was another colleague in 2011. A group came to us in Leeds, and they call themselves Lilac Co-housing. You can find them online, and they've got a whole suite of documents as to what they did and how they did it, and what allowed them to achieve what they did. But it's a group that basically took it into their own hands. They basically found a construction company that would do off-site construction, a bit like Zed, I guess, to produce their home to a very high sustainable level. So they actually used a straw building construction for their homes, but basically on a co-housing basis built further sustainability. So not only do you get energy sustainability into that, but it was 20 homes as one group. So if you think about it in terms of if somebody loses their job in that community, effectively the community then supported them and sort of held it up, so they weren't under threat of losing their home because one lost their job. They're actually, the group then came together and supported, and also grow their own food, and also twice a week all eat together as a community group, so they could, if you like, fall out but also get back together and come and eat together as well, as to, if you like, a real social situation. So, you know, a really great project in terms of their sustainability. And I guess housing is complex, and they said their situation is complex because actually your home is just normally your family units and you're really tight and you keep it together, but with them it's 20 families living under a series of roofs with shared space. But that complexity for them gave flexibility but also resilience, because of that ability to cover each other and look after each other so that they didn't fall out into homelessness, and also, you know, supported their requirements across the board. So the bank supports many different projects within housing, mainly affordable housing, so social housing through to community-led housing, community land trusts, co-housing, but also we are just certainly led in the Netherlands. We're a Dutch bank. They've been looking at some sustainable build for market, and we're actually doing, I think, a project next year which will be sort of market-led housing likely, but it'll be built wholly on sustainability, and looking at zero carbon housing. And that's it from me. I'd like to kick off, I guess they're going to come up here and come up to the front. So if I can kick off a question, and I guess it was Chris, with his lack of experience of housing that, well, they were all experienced with their own homes, but he said we can't expect her to leave here, and I'm going to misquote you, of course, because that's the way we do it, because of fear. You know, we're not going to go away and change because of fear. But what would you like us to change? What could we change on our own homes going away from here tonight? From each of you, please.
I'm going to go for an unusual one, actually. We had to go through this, the mural on the front of the building, the climate change one. We had to give some calls to action, so we went through all the usual ones you'd expect. And we put an unusual one at the end, which is, I'm not going to tell you to change a certain technology in your home or to use your home in a different way. What I'm going to encourage you to do is to talk to people about climate change and your home. and what you do. Because what I realise is, how often do you talk to your friends and your neighbours and your colleagues about climate change? I don't do it that much outside of work, and it's my job. So what I encourage you is to have those conversations and make it part of the things we talk about in our daily lives, along with the weather, ironically, and everything else. So my thing is talk about it, share what you've heard tonight, share the things you're doing, and start conversations.
Very difficult question. Are homes already fairly low carbon? I think probably the best plan to reduce its impact further would be to get more people living in it. So we're just empty nesting. So we could halve it by having another couple living in our house. So probably best thing is to set up a co-housing network. Is that okay, Sue?
Get another couple of dogs.
Hello, I've just got kittens, so but let's not go there. I could talk about them all night. What could we do? I think both Bill and Chris touched on it. The volume house builders are not working and thinking in this way. Your best efforts would be to tell them what you actually want and why you want it. And I think if enough of us make that request, they will get the message.
Thank you. So we've got about half an hour or so for questions. I'm hoping loads of hands are going to go in the air in a minute. There you go, excellent. We've only got the one microphone, so I'm going to have to ask you to kind of stand up and project, if that's okay. And I'll kind of try and keep the show on the road. So yours went up quick first. So would you like to, if you want to say who you are and kind of your interest here, that'd be great.
That's
But
really
if you don't want to,
I'm actually working with Bill, but I do have a question for him, a genuine question. My name's Mike Wilkins. I'm a consultant and just started working with ZPod. And one of the things I've been doing is talking to people during the day who've been coming in and out of the pod. And I come from a tradition of working for a housing association in London where we have, sorry, this is a speech, isn't it? It's not a question. It's about construction. Traditional construction, right, means that you've got a lot of defects. That's always the case. So my question is actually to Bill. I'm assuming that the defects, once you go out of the factory, what level of defects do we have?
Well, it's as good as your QA procedure in your factory. I mean, I think far fewer. I think what's really exciting, and the reason why modern methods of construction are so important, and particularly volumetric, is that you don't need contractors anymore. You literally can. We do a drawing in our office, in our architect studio. It gets sent out to a CAD/CAM facility in a CLT factory, cross-laminated timber factory, and the panels are cut with the plug sockets, the windows, everything to plus or minus 3 millimeters, and they get delivered to site or to our assembly factory. So the conventional construction industry doesn't really offer very much added value any longer. And that means you don't have to pay 14-15% added premium for someone sitting in a porta cabin watching all this going on and doing a program, because actually that's all done by your factory manager. So I think that it's going to transform the industry, frankly, and conventional contractors better wake up.
Chair's prerogative and ask a supplementary question to that, because we've had a number of talks that have linked sort of community involvement and skills in with the delivery of housing, and I just wonder if you see a kind of a tension there between those agendas of sort of prefabrication and standardisation, and then potentially how people get involved in shaping their home. So the level of finish. I mean, Yuli talked about sort of different external finishes, but is there a kind of a happy place in the middle where you can standardise and get the benefits of all that brings, but also then involve people and upskill people as part of the process of getting new housing built?
Okay.
That was sort of a question.
Is that for me? Or
Okay. Sorry.
Oh, well, I'll answer it very quickly. I think it's very empowering. I mean, we're using SketchUp, which is a free program. You can download it off the internet. Basically, people can, in the end, quite soon, design their own homes, get them automatically constructed to extremely high standards. We're producing the Zero Built Homes construction system, the ZPODS construction system. We can set up factories, pop-up factories in derelict warehouses or abandoned premises. People can, once they get familiar with these very simple to use programs, and if they understand the construction systems involved, it's very liberating. They will be able to have huge ranges of variety. That's not available right now because it's quite a lot of work. It's taken us 5 years to get where we are. But within another 5 or 10 years, I can see this being a great democratisation of the industry.
Hello. Coming from, I think, a different end of what your question was, whether there was some way that people with perhaps craft skills could actually engage with this industry. I live in Exmoor, so we have a lot of traditional skills there, like lime plaster, So yes, I think so. I think it's important to have a system that enables you to get a home that is helps you reduce your energy consumption. It already gives you a framework for it, so you don't have to work it out for yourself from scratch, from every brick, where did it come from, what energy embodied carbon has. It's really worthwhile having that framework, and then you can work into it yourselves. The level of where you buy the finished product, that's up to you. But I think there is probably a base build spec that you should actually purchase the best technology can give you, and then the craft can go on top of that.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything you want to add? Lady there.
Can you tell us what's going on in Bristol? So, what's actually happening in the city? I have no idea.
In terms of what?
In terms of what we're talking about, sustainable housing. Same question.
Same question.
Potentially about the Bristol Housing Company, how much they launch.
Yeah, feel free if people want to answer the question from the audience. That's fantastic.
I don't know. I went to the launch and I was very disappointed that Bristol Housing Company ain't seeking to create a partnership with commercial developers, but they didn't seem to have sustainability very high on their agenda.
No,
and when I asked the question, I raised it in terms of the environmental performance, because if you spend more on the capital to start with, you don't have the bills. Mm-hmm. So it basically, you say, well, you can spend more on your mortgage because you're not spending money, and if your income falls, the things you can cut down, you can't cut down your mortgage, you've got to pay that. But if you've got no bills, you don't suddenly live in a cold house. But people need to lobby the council now to say, please, fight for that.
The vision of the Bristol Housing Festival is to raise the debate, the demand, the opportunity to really prototype this new technology, because we're back into this conversation. There's systemic failure in the way we're building housing, in the way we're thinking about the purpose of housing. And it's very easy then very quickly to enter into a blame game. So we'll blame the politicians, or we'll blame the big house builders. But actually what I've experienced over the last 18 months when we envision this, there's really good people working in those systems, but they can't change the system because they're in a systemic failure. And what we need to do a little bit, in my view, is engage with some of this new technology where we can start to learn how the sustainability agenda can be right at the top, how we can look at the affordability and the quality of housing, but we look at what the outcome of our housing is altogether. So that is about sustainability. But it was interesting about the Lilac community, because that's also about how we really make community and people flourishing the key agenda. And of course, sustainability is right at the core of that. Because if we're not being responsible with how we're using our resources, ultimately we're mortgaging our children's futures. And we know that, but it's very hard within the system right now. So the vision of the Housing Festival in terms of what's going on in Bristol, actually there are some good things going on and there's some incredibly forward thinking, but it's slow to get it moving. And what we're trying to do is inject urgency into this.
So there's nothing happening?
No, that isn't fair.
I just want to
Yeah. Well, but the thing is, that with due respect, that kind of response doesn't help the level of how we engage, because what we all need to do is say, okay, well, what are we doing? Let's celebrate that. Let's focus on what is happening, and let's be critical in a positive. Like, it's very easy. Just we've got, this is our problem. You know, it's no.
Sorry, I just asked what was going on in Bristol, and I didn't get a response.
Well, that's a very big question. Tim, why don't you pop up? You work for the City Council. But the thing is, that sort of question, we could break that down into different components. It's a big question, in fact.
Yes, good evening. My name's Tim Southall. I'm the Housing Delivery Manager at Bristol.
Look at that, perfect.
Basically, the biggest sustainable scheme that's going on at the moment, it's not as sustainable as I would personally like it, but it's at least a step in the right direction. And that is in the former Dunmale school site in Southmead, where United Communities are working with HAB, BBRC and other suppliers to produce a Code 4, that's, you know, the old Code 4, but we're keeping to it. I think the key thing is all of the affordable rent homes on that site, because there will be 58% affordable on that site, will be delivered with the highest level of airtightness we were able to achieve. It's not as high as Passive House, I accept that, but it's a step in the right direction. And also many other sort of features that you would expect in the highest quality sustainable housing. Now, the scheme's taken quite a long time to get on site. It's now on site and will be delivering from the end of next year. So look forward to that coming forward. But I think it's important that as we progress with the Mayor's target of 2,000 homes, of which 800 are affordable in 2021, that a fair proportion of those demonstrate how we can take on the best sustainable housing in the country. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim.
Yes, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, that's okay. Martin Foden. Well, I'm actually part of the local government member of the National Right to Build Task Force, which Nationwide Foundation sponsor, and that's promoting both self-build, custom-build and community-led housing. But as a local Green councillor, I'm also interested in community-led housing in Bristol, and in fact the council has also identified a whole range of sites that could be available for community-led self-built housing in this city. And I was at a meeting only a few weeks ago with dozens of people who are very keen to build their homes in Bristol, and undoubtedly the majority, if not all of them, would want to build to very high quality, sustainable standards. And there have been some other projects similar to what we've heard tonight of modular, self-built, timber, high quality, environmentally kind of sound homes, which could be built in Bristol if the land is available. But I have a question, both as someone interested in housing, someone who lives on a plot that used to be a garage, and someone concerned about the quality and the choice we have. Because my question for the panel is the dilemmas between scale and cost and the amount of community input into it. Because the larger the projects, the more likely you won't get the land. Someone with a lot of capital will get the land because they'll make a bigger bid for it than just saying we'll put some houses on it. I don't mean just, but you know, I'm inspired by what I've heard tonight. But the more that gets delivered in one go, the less likely it will be of a community-led or a small-scale quality kind of adaptable type of home. The more likely it will be a corporate project. And indeed, the Mayor has in effect encouraged very large high-rise tower block development in Bristol by saying that shows ambition rather than saying quality community-led housing shows ambition, which personally I would like to see for Bristol, more communities rather than less towers, because there are pros but also lots of cons with towers. So my question for the panel was, how can you upscale what you're doing, but not too much? How can you deliver a lot, but not ask for very big plots of land too readily at the start, when someone else will parachute in and say, but our company can take it and do more, and it will be lower quality. They'll make a profit out of it, and the community will get less out of it. So, you know, the bigger the car park, or the bigger the row of garages, the more likely it will be a company that gets it, not the community that gets it. That's just a sort of provocation.
Simple question. I think you touched on it in terms of the amount of smaller sites there are, but
yeah, I mean, I understand your point, but I mean, we've identified sites that weren't previously considered sites,
sure.
And they're mainly owned by the public sector anyway. They're sites owned by hospitals, schools, local authorities. So the council, you own the sites already. No, all of them, pretty well all of them were the ones we've been looking at. So, and what we asked was, we've come with a product to show what you could have. We haven't said exactly how you need it. You've got to have a range of options, because otherwise it can't be costed and the viability can't be assessed. And the public aren't all committed self-builders. They aren't all studying Kevin's every last move. I think that, some people just want a really nice house designed for them, and believe it or not, architects can do that. So what I'm hoping is that we can empower ordinary people to solve their own problems. We can encourage communities to come together. We can develop mixed-use schemes. We can do co-housing. These are just tools which can be manipulated to suit the requirements of each community, and they can decide how high they get. They can decide, what shared facilities they have. They can decide, how they plug in with the local neighbourhood and the desire lines, and whether they need a garden or whether they need a rooftop conservatory, whether they need a shared electric bikes scheme. All this stuff comes from dialogue, and I'm in favour of just giving everybody a kit of parts which is actually deliverable, will happen, can be pre-funded, because the Triodos Bank will of course say that's great, they'll fund, and then the local authority is left with absolutely no excuse not to do it.
I just want to say that the local authority, from the housing company launch, you did say that on the smaller sites, they're already working with housing associations and other groups. So it's only the really much larger sites that the housing company will be addressing as a joint venture with the city. That would be a different area. The larger sites do need a very comprehensive urban planning strategy upon it. I think during that launch, a question was asked about public engagement by Avril, and I think that's a very key component of it. I think the process will allow that public engagement.
I think that the engagement piece can, happen at any scale. So I think that's a model that's completely scalable. From an urban planning point of view, the larger and more complicated the scheme, the more input it is, the more bodies you get involved, and it slows down. But I think the examples we've seen tonight, and also there's the We Can Make example from Knoll West, which is down on the exhibition as well. That's arguably a large site, because it's looking at an overlay of infill over a 5,000 home estate of Knoll West. So I think there's a way of looking at scale, which is sort of also needs to be thought about as a different way of providing an overlay, rather than just saying we're going to take an empty site and put as much as we can on it. It's a little bit more nuanced than that, I think.
Sure, thanks.
Okay. Yes, gentleman, you stay.
My name is Gabriel Layu. I'm studying creative technology in Yuli, Bristol, and I've got a question for Z Life. Is that we'll be building homes on top of the public parking lots. So that means in the future, if I drive a car, then I may possibly be parking my car underneath someone else's home. So how would you persuade me if I don't feel comfortable about it?
Live somewhere else.
You have floored me there. Do you not want to park your car under anything? I mean, most people are quite happy about parking their car under someone else's building or someone else's structure. Most people park their cars under apartment blocks. Many people park them in underground garages. Most people don't like birds flying over their cars and redecorating them. Most people don't like their cars getting hot in the summer. I mean, it could be deemed an advantage not, to park your car under somebody else's house. And if you drive an electric car, which you'll be forced to anyway, because it's, UK mandatory policy within a certain timescale, you'll be able to charge your car, whereas most other places you won't. So I'd say you'll be queuing up to get on to park.
And another question for Gap House is that your houses are built on the abandoned garages. Well, what I'm thinking of is those places are abandoned for some reasons. There must be, like they are very poor conditions, or they are very far away from the entrance, or very hard to reach. So how do you address those issues when a customer comes to look at those houses?
So far, the sites that we have been asked to look at are in established suburban neighborhoods, and most of them are council or council co-owned sites. So, and they have previously, through housing companies and joint ventures, reviewed these sites and discounted them for constraints such as access or fear of overlooking and not, single aspects and things like that. So our study was to say, is there a way of actually designing a very, very attractive, desirable home within these very, very constrained sites? It does assume certain things that will come along, such as no car ownership, using car share or on-demand vehicles. It is because if you follow the local authority standards of 1.5 to 2 cars per house, you would never build on those lands because you couldn't fit those in. Also, it assumes that there will be a different refuse strategy. Probably have to think around that because most sites are condemned for not being able to have a refuse vehicle turn around within the site, not to say enter it, forward exit it. So those constraints killed those sites. So they've been sitting redundant or undeveloped for many, many years. So until the council and the people say, no, actually, we can do something with this. And certainly the gentleman who said, let's engage with self-build, I think look to us, so-called professional and consultants as facilitators. Please do, that's where we like to think of as facilitators. Take you any journey you want, how far you want to go with the self-build or the prefab or turnkey options. And I also appeal to the local authority as well, Bristol City Council, to joint venture in this. I think that's the only way to do it all together.
We've probably got time for a couple more questions, although I haven't taken any from the back. The gentleman with his hand up. Yep.
I'm a member of the Bristol Data Scientist Group, and I really like the ideas you put forward with the gap houses, particularly the Z-pods, EAT. But in all of this, I just wondered if any consideration would be given to the wider infrastructure. The reason I'm asking more expensive than making an original land plot. I wonder if there's been any consideration of technology solutions to alter the existing infrastructure and provision of water and sewage systems.
So just so I get the numbers right. So you're saying the cost of infrastructure to an existing brownfield site was
increases the cost of small
compared to an out-of-town greenfield site?
Yes.
I think that's,
6 times more expensive.
to me, just intuitively it feels like quite a simplistic way of looking at it, because you're hardwiring in a whole load of other infrastructure challenges and commuting and all that stuff. But has anyone got any comments on that?
This was just sewage.
Yeah, okay.
Wasn't anything else.
Well, it's very easy. I mean, the latest dry composting toilets, particularly the Scandinavian ones, are so sophisticated, it seriously begs whether you really need a wet sewage system at all. And with the latest grey water treatment plants, you can treat the rainwater, the grey water, to the point where it can be discharged as surface water. So with those combination of those technologies, game on, and they're actually extraordinarily low cost compared to mains connections. So if you then add the benefits from building integrated photovoltaics, battery storage, you can plug into the street lighting circuits, you don't need to meet peak power demand anymore, maximise energy efficiency through all the techniques that have been discussed. It's game on. If you lost that argument, you weren't advocating all the correct kit, and you didn't have the correct prices, and you didn't have, and that's why you need to work with people, teams that have been trying to do this for the last 25 years, rather than just people who just surf on the internet for 5 minutes and think they're experts.
Thank you. I think we've got one more question. I'm going to come to this gentleman here, if that's okay.
Excuse me, I have a comment actually rather than a question.
Okay, could you turn it into a question maybe?
Yeah, you can accept it as a question actually. Okay, just all these ideas are perfect ideas, nice ideas, sustainable housing, they are very energy efficient, resource material efficient, and space friendly, eco-friendly. But I don't accept all these plans, as a solution to housing problem, because housing problem don't have, we have more house than we need actually. There are so many houses that are empty right now. There are so many people, they have many more house than they need. And I don't accept the presentation of these ideas as a solution to housing problem, as a pressure to the city council to allot the public spaces to this kind of project to solve the housing problem. These ideas they are nice project, they are eco-friendly project, but they are not the solution of housing problem. Because homelessness problem don't have connection with this, because homeless people cannot afford to buy this house anyway. And we need more efficient house management system rather than to invest these houses. Because if a people has a 5 house in different parts of UK and he wants to have in his 6th house in this model, it doesn't mean that it is sustainable.
Okay.
It's just different.
I think it's. I don't think we've. If I have said it, I don't think this is being presented as the solution to the housing crisis. I think the talks that we've had over the last 5 days have all looked at different aspects of what is a very complicated and interconnected problem, and each one has tried to look at different areas, recognising that we need to do a lot more of everything in order to understand both what works and what doesn't, but also to basically look at up-speccing existing homes, looking at over-occupancy, under-occupancy, as well as looking at new homes. So I think this is part of the solution, I would say. Yeah. But I take your comment in terms of it being a much broader, complex system.
Yeah, but public space is not only about the space, but it's all about air. We cannot fill all these public spaces and gaps in the city with this kind of filling projects. then all the city will be like with
Yeah, but they're garages and car parks. Sorry, I'm going to heckle you.
So do you want
Well, these aren't public spaces. These are really leftover barren urban deserts. The lock-up garages that Yuli showed were truly grim. Most of the urban car parks that we're looking at, and I've spent a whole day trooping around them, are depressing places. So, but reusing the air rights above car parks really does not damage your sense of urban space in any shape or form. So you're wrong.
This was, if you remember, us proposing the gap house. Yes, sure, those are gaps and we should make the most of them. But our principles for quality living space came from our work for multi-story Cadney-Toh in Manchester. You know, that's a small scale micro living units, which then addresses the numbers you're talking about. What the challenge here is in Bristol is that the housing standards for areas are quite high, and there doesn't seem to be any negotiation. So it makes the units quite big for two bed unit, you know, for 2+ people, and it's and therefore the gap house will not be feasible, you know. Therefore that piece of land cannot be used because we just couldn't fit the standards in. Now, it's for the public to really say that actually I'll be very happy to live there, you know, standards or not, because with very, very well-designed homes, we could fill those gaps. But in volume, I understand. I did the rough calculation of even if we used every site we could find for those garages, which we kind of estimated was about 2,000, we will only supply 4% of the target of 13,500 homes for Bristol by 2035. So 4% is 4%.
Thank you. I think we need to wrap up there, so we're 5 minutes over. So if you'd like to join me in thanking our speakers, Yuli, Bill and Chris. And also thank you, Simon. I'd like to thank you all for coming this evening and for asking great questions. It's been a really interesting conversation, as all of them have been actually, so thank you for that. If you haven't got down to the exhibition on the waterfront, then please do. It's open until Sunday 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. So you'll be able to see the Z-Pod there, and you'll be able to look around some other examples of the potential different housing types. So thank you very much for coming.